out of which has come this marvellous book. And I want to start, if I may, with what type of man was he in terms of how he would come over? Now, if he was sitting here now, would you look at him and think, that's an impressive looking figure?
Oh, you certainly would. I mean, that's partly why he was always being painted and later photographed and busts made of him, because he was such an extraordinarily strong and powerful personality. His publishers commissioned Macleay's just before this wonderful painting in '39.
So Daniel Macleay's the Victorian artist.
And the difference is, in the Macleay's portrait, Dickens is looking sideways, and in Margaret Gillis's portrait, he's looking straight at you with those luminous eyes. But the Macleay's portrait, of course, was hugely admired. I mean, Thackeray, when he saw it, said, "The real identical Boz, I think we may promise ourselves a brilliant future from this countenance." I mean, to get that from a portrait is quite something, isn't it? And then his friend Forster said that the face was wonderfully beaming with intellect and running over with humour and cheerfulness. Light and motion flashed from every part of it. But this portrait by Margaret Gillis came about partly through her partner, Thomas Southwood Smith, who was a Liberal doctor, and he was he was reporting to a Royal Commission on the employment of children, and was very, very shocked by what he found, that children as young as 5 were employed down the mines and in factories. And so he was writing about this and talked to Dickens. And Dickens thought of writing journalistically about this. And then it seems to me it came to him that art is stronger than polemic. And he decided to set out to write Christmas Carol, which is what he was doing while Margaret Gillis was painting him. She had, I think, 5 or 6 sittings with him. And Dickens describes how, so while he was doing these sittings, at night, he says, he was writing in his head, weeping and laughing and weeping again as he walked about the black streets of London, 15 and 20 miles, many a night when all the sober folks had gone to bed. So I think it's a wonderful sort of contrast to the thought of these sittings going on and what he was doing at night.
Do we get the impression that he was a vain man, or if not a vain man, someone who cared almost too much about how he looked and how he came over?
I think he was quite keen on his own hair. He had this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful hair.
Yes, we have this mirror next door.
But I think he had too much going on to get lost in vanity. When he has wonderful descriptions when he gets a cold, he's always talking about his nose becoming impossible, my nose incomprehensible, he says, and knows that he looks absolutely ghastly. So I don't think he was vain. Another quote from this same time, from a French critic who came to London and saw him, wrote of him like this: "He is young, long brown, rather untidy hair falls over the forehead of an unhealthy pallor. The bright, restless eyes testify to an unusual sagacity and quick intelligence. My uneasy curiosity, nevertheless, did not find there all that I expected, and I wondered what I would have thought of Dickens had I met him by chance, not knowing him, in a theatre, at a ball, in a public vehicle, or on a steamboat. I felt that I might well have taken the most popular novelist of the day for the head clerk of a banking house, a smart reporter at an assize court, the secret agent of a diplomatic intrigue, an astute and wily barrister, a lucky gambler, or simply the manager of a troupe of strolling players." Well, of course, Dickens would have loved that, manager of a troupe of strolling players, and how that was his other career in his head always. But I think that's rather interesting.
It is. And the fact that it's written in the first place, the fact that people are so interested, because one of the things that I got out of your book was just what a hell of a celebrity he was.
Yes, yes. Well,
And in America, people following him down the street and wanting to snip bits of his hair.
yes, or a bit of his coat. That's
I mean,
right,
so
yes.
what was it? I mean, he was a bit of a sort of Andrew Lloyd Webber of his time in that respect. Do you think that he got out there, he managed to incorporate people in a medium which they weren't particularly used to, and became a sort of celebrity popularist in that way? Or is that unfair?
Well, that's part of him, but the other part of him is that he was intent on good work, and I think one cannot exaggerate this, that he wanted to do good in the world, not just through his writing, but by other things. For instance, during this period, a family he knew called the Eltons, the mother of 6 daughters and son had died, and then the father an actor drowned. What did Dickens do? He immediately set up a committee to raise money for them, and succeeded in raising a great deal of money. He saw that the eldest daughter, Esther, the name he was to use, of course, in a novel later, went to a teacher training college so that she could be a mother to her little sisters and small brother. And for years and years, he was in touch with them. He saw that they were all brought up well. And in, I think, 1859, they all sat down and wrote him a letter to thank him, saying how wonderful he'd been. Well, this man may have been keen on celebrity, but he didn't do this for celebrity. He did it out of the real goodness of his heart.
But what I want to try and get a sense of is why he was so hugely successful. I mean, why did he reach so many people, and why did he have this aura as a result?
Well, because he wrote so well, and because he wrote in a way, he made people laugh, he made people cry, he did those basic things. He manipulated people's emotions. He told them the sort of stories they could never have imagined for themselves, but which absolutely drew them in.
And do you think he was the first to do that in that way?
Well, there's Shakespeare, isn't there? I mean,
You haven't done him, have you?
too big for me. No, but he was seen to be a new voice, a new approach. But can we go back to the good works? I'm rather keen on the good works. He made friends with Miss Coutts. She hadn't become a baroness yet, but she was the richest woman in England. And she suggested that he should go and visit ragged schools were set up for children. We've talked about him being interested in the employment of children. Now, the fact that children got no education. So he visited a ragged school, and he wrote an account to Miss Coutts. I will only read you a tiny bit of his letter, but it's an absolutely wonderful letter. Actually, partly it says, when he went in, these cheeky children gathered round, and they laughed at his long hair, which he was vain of, and his white trousers, which he was also vain of, and he couldn't help mentioning that to her. He said they were being taught by good, honest teachers, but, he said, they were trying to inculcate religion and talking about the catechism to these children. And Dickens said, these children live on the streets. Their lives are one continued punishment. And it's completely pointless to try and give them religion. Sometimes the children don't come in for a week, and when they come back, they explain they've been in prison. All of them are undernourished. He says to impress them, and Miss Coutts was very religious, he says to her, to impress them even with the idea of a God when their own condition is so desolate becomes a monstrous task. I think this is Dickens at his very best. He goes and sees. He tells to the right person what's wrong. He respects the people who are making an effort, but he also puts his finger on how it's not really...
Very practical.
Yes, yes. Yes, homeless, starving pupils, he says. Homeless, starving and disabled pupils. Some of them are off in prison.
How much of his compassion do you think derives from his own childhood and the challenges that he faced?
Well, here we're coming back to Christmas Carol, aren't we? In Christmas Carol, Scrooge learns pity by being shown himself as a child. And he pities this child he sees who is himself. And from that pity, he begins to give pity to other people. So Dickens is actually, I think, really making that point very, very strongly. And it's interesting to me that Dickens went on fairly soon afterwards, to tell his friend Forster about his own difficult, unhappy and cruel childhood working in the blacking factory, which he has not talked about before. And then he appoints Forster to become his biographer, and then Forster, when Dickens is planning to write David Copperfield, Forster suggests that he should write it in the first person, which was a brilliant, brilliant suggestion. And so, David Copperfield, for all of us who love Dickens, David Copperfield is the text, isn't it? This, just the way Charlotte Bronte does with Jane Eyre, written almost at the same time. For the first time, we have shown children absolutely as they are. So I sort of see this link. And sometimes, looking at Margaret Gillis's wonderful portrait, I sort of feel that that almost could be David Copperfield.
It's worth mentioning that the first reference that Dickens makes to the Christmas Carol is on the very day that he's sitting to Gillis's portrait. And Gillis, amongst other things, was an illustrator of the state of the mines and children working in the mines. And the Ghost of Christmas Present, of course, takes Scrooge down to the mines.
Yes, absolutely.
So
to the miners' homes, yes. I
right.
don't think he goes into the mines. He goes
Right.
to the homes of the miners.
Okay.
Yes. No, that's quite right. But we mustn't forget fun. I mean, fun was extremely important to Dickens. There was a lot of fun in Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
When Dickens insisted that the book should be very beautifully produced with gilt and fine colouring, so much so that although it sold 6,000 copies before Christmas, published in October, I think, he didn't make any money on it at all,
No.
which was important for him because he wasn't doing very well financially.
Yeah.
But at that Christmas, he had tremendous parties, and he and Forster did conjuring tricks. They did a wonderful conjuring trick with a hat into which they put flour and eggs, and then took it off, and a cooked plum pudding came out. Jane Carlyle was at this party, and she said afterwards, "Oh, so much more fun, parties with these blackguardist literary people than you have in conventional drawing rooms." It's quite, and Dickens tried to persuade Jane Carlyle to dance with him, but went almost onto his knees, she said, but not quite. And then on Boxing Day, he gave another party with more conjuring tricks. So all this energy was, going here and there. And then a fortnight after that, something like that, his wife, Catherine, gave birth to their fourth child. And here Dickens doesn't behave well. He didn't want more than 3 children, and it never crossed his mind, it seems to me, to find out how he might avoid this. So the birth of Francis, he went to see Catherine, and what he said something absolutely appalling about, "Kate is all right, and so they tell me is the baby, but I decline on principle to look at the latter object." Not very nice for Catherine, was it, to have her baby treated like that?
Yeah, I mean, you clearly and understandably, and reading your book, I have it as well, a huge admiration for Dickens, a tremendously humane, clever, buzzing individual on so many levels. But there is a dark side, isn't there? I mean, the way he treated his wife was pretty awful.
Yes, it's very sad that, because they'd been in America together, and she'd been very jolly, and he said she's an out-and-outer, and I think they must have agreed that they wouldn't let her get pregnant while she was in America, and they succeeded on the American trip. And they did acting together, and she was a great support to him, and they had a lot of fun. And then they come back, and almost immediately she's pregnant again, and again she's sort of pushed aside, or pushes herself aside in this rather sad way. He even suggested that because they were going to go abroad, because they were short of money in the following year, they were going to live abroad, he suggested that baby should be left behind with somebody. Fortunately, they didn't actually do that in the end, but it seems to me, as a mother, very, very sort of heartless thing to do.
Yes. But what to go back to his childhood, because one of the feelings I got from the book was that there was a feeling of genuine embarrassment about him having to go and work in the blacking factory, to be seen through the window working there. And this father, this hugely irritating father, who also doted on him as well. There's an interesting sort of powder keg of elements there, aren't there?
There is, and of course the father was terribly troublesome at this time. He moved his parents to Devon to get them out of the way. His father was behaving absolutely atrociously, and Dickens was furious with him, because he not only asked Dickens for money all the time, he asked Dickens publishers, he said to Dickens publishers, he came back to London and settled, I think, Blackheath or something, and wrote to Dickens publishers saying, could he have money for season tickets into London so that he could go and see what's happening in London. And he went on like this, and Dickens was absolutely enraged.
Embarrassed as well, I suspect.
Yes.
So he was Wilkins Micawber, was he?
Well, there's a bit of
Yeah.
him, obviously.
Yeah.
But of course later, when Dickens actually found him a job, when Dickens set up a newspaper and gave him a job, he was brilliant. He got on well with the journalists, and he kept that job till the end of his life. And Dickens adored him again. And when he died, Dickens said to Forster, my father was a great man, he was a wonderful man. You see Dickens doing this absolute up and down, being really fed up with his father, hating him, talking about his audacious ingratitude, and feeling, you talk about his embarrassment. I mean, his father was definitely an embarrassment to him.
You get him snipping out autographs for his son, don't you, and selling them?
Yes.
I mean, do you think that there's a whole aspect of Dickens that we don't know, because you seem to have covered an awful lot. I mean,
That may well be.
there may well be. I mean, there's such a kaleidoscope of exciting facets to his personality. Oh, it's almost too much. I can't quite categorise him in any way.
No, well, I think he'd be delighted. I think he would like to be an elusive figure. And the reason that he's elusive is that he does sort of contain multitudes. I mean, we were talking about good works, and we were talking about fun. And I'll do, if I may, one more bit of reading, because this is almost my favourite Dickens letter. This is from the same period, March 1844. He left his wife and the baby, and in order to do good, he went up to Liverpool to help raise money for the Liverpool Mechanics Institute, which was for lessons, higher education for working men and women. It was terrifically, these institutes that Dickens supported, many of them turned into what are now our universities. So he was frightfully important and good. And then he was to go on from there to Birmingham, where they were setting up a polytechnic, again to make a speech. So he writes to his sister, describing part of this trip. I left Liverpool at 10:30 on Wednesday morning and reached Birmingham at about 3:30, where I was received by some most excellent fellows and straightway conducted to the town hall. Do you know Birmingham Old Town Hall? It's like a Greek temple, absolutely huge, highly raised building, marvellous, which positively took away my breath. The committee of ladies had decorated that immense building with artificial flowers to such an extent that it looked like a vast garden. And on the front of the gallery, facing the platform, were the words, "Welcome, Dick," in gigantic letters of the same material. There were also transparencies representing diverse fames in the act of crowning diverse Dicks, to the unspeakable admiration and delight of the Queen, who also there looked on approvingly, not the real Queen, an image of the Queen. Well then, he goes on to tell his sister that having danced a Sir Roger de Coverley 40 couple until 3 o'clock in the morning, I was rendered rather nervous by these splendid preparations. But I dined by myself at the inn. I took a pint of champagne and a pint of sherry, dressed myself in my magpie waistcoat, and was as hard as iron and cool as a cucumber again. At 10 minutes before 8, they fetched me, and immediately on my arrival I ascended. The hall was crammed to the roof with all the first-rate Tories, Whigs, Radicals, Brexiteers no doubt, Leavers no doubt, in the town, and ladies in full dress were standing for want of seats in all parts of the crowd. The moment Dick appeared, the whole assembly stood up with a noise like the rustling of leaves in a wood, and began to cheer in the most terrific manner I ever heard, beginning again and again. When they at last left off, Dick dashed on, and I must say that he delivered the best speech I ever heard him make. Now, isn't that a lovable, isn't that an extraordinary letter boasting to his sister about his fame, the wonderful things he was doing, the fun he was having, and how skillful, how he could just, do anything he liked with the assembled people.
Didn't he toy with the thought of politics?
Well, he hated the House of Parliament. I was asked to speak to MPs a few years ago, and it was terribly embarrassing because I had to tell them that he really despised. He'd been a reporter in the House of Commons, and he loathed, and he did not want to do it. And he thought they were always sort of setting up foreign wars and things rather than doing the reforms they should be making in England.
And he's an actor as well, isn't he?
He's an actor, yes, marvellous actor.
Did he want to be one?
Well, he was one. I mean, as you know, he did a huge amount. I mean,
a professional.
Well, he'd thought of it. And he went for an audition, and he had one of his terrible colds when he couldn't speak.
Yeah.
So he said, "Come back."
Yeah.
And between the time when he was going to come back, I think he got his job. He was reporting, and he was doing well as a reporter. But he always loved the stage. He always wanted to act and to direct. I mean, he said if he'd had his life again, he would have liked to have directed a theatre, done everything. He wanted to. He'd have done the costumes, he'd have done the sets, he'd have done the acting, he'd have done the directing. He always thought he could take on everything, and he pretty well could.
Do you think he was a vulnerable person?
I think one reason we love Dickens is that, as you suggest, there was always that vulnerability in him, which surely must go back to the childhood and to the fear he felt as a child, the fear that he would be thrown on the scrap heap, that he wouldn't get a proper education, wouldn't be able to do the things he wanted to do. Actually, again, after Christmas Carol was published, and he hadn't made any money, he was in debt. He went around trying to borrow money from friends, looking for a patron. His publishers had actually cut what they were paying him because Martin Chuzzlewit, the novel he was writing then, wasn't doing well. And this moving abroad was very much, could let out Devonshire Place house for a high rent and take his family off abroad. He did feel vulnerable, and he went through quite a period after that when he was very uncertain. And only with Dombey, which was the next book, that made him financially secure for the first time.
So a sort of fear, an inferiority complex perhaps, was something that drove him?
I'm not sure he had an inferiority complex. I don't think he had an inferiority complex. If you think he and Thackeray...
He was always talking about lack of education. He's a lack of formal education, was it? Not always. But
well, he didn't say much about it. It was rather a private thing.
Yeah. But he felt the lack of it, didn't he? Or felt the lack at the time of the opportunity for it.
Well, he dealt with it very well because.
So just tell us, it was what, 2 years of education, formal education here?
after the blacking factory,
Yes.
he went back. Yes, I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But he could educate himself. I mean, and he found Forster, and Forster read all his proofs. Forster advised him. Forster certainly saved him from blunders to some extent, while adoring him.
Yeah.
And they really were absolutely very, very close friends. It was a wonderful friendship.
So it's saving him from what, literary mistakes?
Yes.
So what, misuse of the semicolon and what?
Well, I suppose from small
Yeah.
grammatical mistakes. But of course Dickens made a way of writing which was all his own. His own syntax, his own,
Yes.
and his dialogue is absolutely wonderful, and his narrative is wonderful.
So do you think he sort of changed the paradigm a bit in what he did? Didn't he write almost like dialogue? I mean, the author's voice was almost indistinguishable from someone who might be telling an anecdote.
Well, he was very, very good at narrative. But I mean, on his manuscripts, the dialogue is clearly laid out.
Yes, no, sure, but the speed and gusto and the sort of, it's not really colloquial, but it feels it.
Yes.
His rejoicing in the use of cliches when need be as well. Dead as a doornail.
Yes, well, he's very, very funny. Yes, he is. I'm not really a literary critic.
So we were trying to think of who might be a modern Dickens, or how that legacy could be seen in individuals. Stephen Fry was a possibility. He came to the opening of
Yes, I saw that.
the unveiling.
Yes.
And
He's a wonderful speaker.
listening to this sort of great torrent of
Yes,
words coming out of his voice.
He speaks,
This-
Stephen Fry, it all comes out wonderfully. doesn't
Yes,
it?
this sort of fizzy interest in so much.
But I don't think he's a Dickens.
Yeah.
I think we must preserve Dickens on his eminence, honestly. I don't think anybody, people have learnt from Dickens. I mean, it's quite surprising, Catherine Mansfield learned from Dickens,
Yeah.
she said. So I think all writers who read Dickens take something from him. One of Dickens's faults was that he didn't like Jane Austen. That's extraordinary.
So having done written about different writers, do you feel warmer to Dickens than to other historical personages? Do you feel even though he died many years ago, do you feel the warmth of human connection to him in a way that perhaps you wouldn't or couldn't with others?
Well, I certainly love him, and when he came to die, he said he didn't want honours, he didn't want memorials. He left his memory to he left his character, the memory of his friends, and he left his works as his memorial. So I admire him very much for that. He wasn't seeking worldly glory. He knew that his character and his writings were the things that he left behind him, and he sort of trusted that. He didn't actually want a statue. He didn't want anything else.
He's never really been out of fashion, has he?
Never.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because he speaks to people all over the world. I mean, that's one of the extraordinary things, that in every part of the world his name is known, and people, I think he's probably best.
Well, but given that in many instances English wouldn't be the first language of the countries you're talking about, what is it intrinsically about what he's doing?
I think the characters he creates are so powerfully created. Sort of obvious, Mr. Micawber, Mrs. Gamp. Well, one can make endless lists of his characters, but he makes them immediately accessible to readers, doesn't he? They open their mouths, and at once you're with a real person.
I think it's just his brilliance with casting characters and people. That's his main talent.
Well, I think it's quite extraordinary how he could produce year after year more different characters.
Do you think that would explain why he went down so well in America at the same time? Who were the pirating his works, weren't they?
Yes, but that got sorted out in the end. Yes. Well, the Americans love a celebrity, and the first time he arrived, he was a celebrity. Said people would try to cut off bits of his overcoat and take bits of him with them. There's a wonderful incident. The second time he went to America, he found himself he was giving lectures, and he was on a train going back to Boston, I think, and a little girl about 12 found an empty seat next to him and sat down beside him. And she said she hadn't been able to get to his lecture, and she was terribly upset. And Dickens nowadays, of course, he'd been arrested, put his arm round her, and they talked. And he said, well, have you read my books? And she said, yes, I've read them all. Only I leave out the boring bits. He said, I read the short boring bits, but I leave out the long boring bits. And of course, he was absolutely entranced by her, and they spent the whole journey talking to each other.
Yes.
And at the end of the journey, he took her along the corridor back to her mother. But can you imagine nowadays how that would be viewed? It's wonderful. He was so attractive to a child, and he loved it.
I'm forever thankful for the fact that at O-level and A-level I was obliged to read Dickens. But I'm wondering...
Which did you read?
David Copperfield.
Perhaps that was enough.
I think, well, okay. Can you remember the books that we had?
Great Expectations.
Great Expectations.
A short one, so
Yeah.
it's always a very good one to recommend for a first read.
I mean, throwing this out to the audience, I mean, how many of you read Dickens for pleasure now? Well, that's probably why you're here, actually. I mean, you read quite a lot of Dickens yourself? Do you
Yes,
still,
I reread.
do you have time for any reading?
I reread, of course, one
Yeah.
rereads the books one loves. And always find new things, yes.
Mm. Incidentally, do start asking Claire anything you need to know about Dickens yourself, because it's a damn good opportunity.
Slightly dangerous after
A
that.
damn good opportunity. Yeah, sure.
In one of your books, it's very interesting, The Invisible Woman, all about Ellen Ternan. The most interesting bit, I think, is the last chapter, where you remember, I'm sure, you do a sort of reconstruction of the death of Dickens.
It wasn't the last chapter, it was written after the book
Yeah.
as a result of someone writing to me with some information.
Yes.
So it was a sort of addition.
And I thought that was quite fascinating, and I wonder what you think about that now. I mean, did you write that chapter sort of half believing that it could have been like that?
Oh, I wrote the chapter believing it could have been like that because I thought there was enough evidence, but very cautiously, and hoping that perhaps some more, you never know whether anything, more evidence, no more evidence has come up. And people often, in fact, someone wrote to me about this, I got a letter yesterday from someone about it, who absolutely believed it. This was the suggestion that Dickens may have collapsed over Ellen Ternan's, and she brought him back in a coach when and then he died, of course, at home. You know, he died at his house. But and I make a point that we know he cashed a cheque at home. It's a bit complicated. It's about the money. Anyhow, when he died, there wasn't the money in his pocket. And where could that money have gone? It could have been explained if he'd gone over to see Ellen. He went over every week. When people ask me if I think it's possible, I say I think I would make it about 4 out of 10 likely. I can't make it more than that because. But the only person who can testify to Dickens' period just before his death, is Georgina. And Georgina was she was very friendly with Ellen Ternan, and also somebody said to me that Georgina would have sold the family silver to save Dickens' reputation, would have given away. So she had a considerable motive for protecting him and Ternan if that had happened. But the vast majority of Dickensians, they think this is all nonsense.
Yes. I thought I was completely convinced by it. I thought it was a splendid book.
Well, I did argue it, I did research it very carefully and think it through, and I do think I found this one piece of evidence that does need dealing with. But I also, people are funny about Dickens. I mean, people were enraged with me when I wrote that book because they said I was blackening Dickens's name. But everybody knew already that he behaved extremely badly to his wife. That he'd separated from her and behaved in a very unpleasant way to her. So that actually, it seemed to me that to suggest that he was passionately in love with someone else, it makes it slightly less awful. At least there was a sort of reason for his behaviour. But nobody can behave well in those circumstances, can they? I think Dickens, I've said before, I think he was a profoundly good man, a man who wanted to do good, who wanted to be good, who did an enormous amount of good. We haven't mentioned the Home for Homeless Women that he set up with Miss Coutts for young women who were prostitutes or in danger of becoming prostitutes, which was an extraordinary thing to do, and which he devoted himself to. And I think people who are very, very good, then when something goes badly wrong, as his marriage clearly did, they sort of behave worse because they don't know how to deal. A cynical man might know how to behave sort of, in some way that would sort of look all right, and he couldn't do that.
A lot
lot of people have said, who possibly didn't know Dickens so well, that portrait seems that he aged so badly. He looks so terribly different to the picture of Dickens that we know so well with the beard.
Photograph.
Yes.
The Frith portrait with the beard.
Well,
yes.
the portrait that has been discovered just looks, compared to what we know of Dickens, just looks so very, very different that he aged badly. Am I just the only one who feels that?
Well, there's quite a gap, of course.
Yes.
Yes, I know, but...
Yeah, yes. I mean, Dickens himself, when he saw it, talked about it almost like he was looking through a mask, an iron mask.
That was the engraving, though. That was the engraving, which is quite different.
Yes, which is
harder. The iron mask without a face behind it, he said.
And Elizabeth Barrett Browning, though, contrary to that, talked about the dust of humanity and the hawk-like eyes.
But she must have been looking at the miniature, not at the engraving.
Yes, I think at the RA.
She was, yes, absolutely. I mean, Forster, when he wanted Frith's painting, Dickens had grown a moustache, and Forster said, let's wait, we don't want all this hair on his face. All that hair. And then in the end, he kept the moustache and grew a beard as well, so Frith had to, that's why Frith's portrait is covered with facial hair. And I think, yes, it doesn't do him good having all that. But I don't think he aged particularly faster than anyone else, did he?
He has a slightly sort of trodden-on looking face later on, I think, in some of the photographs. I know what you mean. And suddenly his eyes droop very strongly. I think that's probably it. But he's only 31, I think, at this point.
And I mean, people didn't know then about looking after themselves like we do now.
No, sure.
Yes. He was a drinker.
Yes, absolutely.
And loads of cheese on toast as well.
And after a large meal, yes, he liked it at the end of the 7-course meal.
Be warm.
Cheese on toast.
Yeah. As well,
Yeah.
Well, he had gout, yes.
And these terrible colds.
Well, the colds, he always had colds. I so sympathise. I always think colds are the worst afflictions there are.
I know he delayed one sitting with Margaret Gillies because he said a cold had ridden roughshod over his face.
Absolutely, yes.
Lovely expression.
He always
He
wrote
used
so
that.
brilliantly describing his colds too.
Yeah.
Collect. Yeah. Well, I don't think we can attribute an opinion to him, but I will if you like. What was he doing after Christmas Carol? He went off to live in France, or to Italy, he went to live in Italy, he went to live in Switzerland, he thought Paris, he lived in Paris, he took his daughters to Paris. He loved Europe. Before he died, he told a German person he was planning to go to Germany. I think Dickens felt like a European.
So you alluded to the low opinion he had of Parliament. And given his background, his celebrity, and some of the political realities of the day that he was pointing out, how did he get on with how did he relate to the sort of political establishment and power?
Well, he had a great friend in Lord John Russell, who was, of course, politically a liberal, and Russell thought he would dedicate one of his books to Russell, and Russell, he used to invite Russell, they would invite Dickens over to Richmond, where I live now, to Petersham, and he would go and stay with them. And they clearly had congenial political views.
And the newspaper he edited as well, wasn't it? There's a liberal newspaper.
Yes, it was a disaster.
Yes, well, at least he tried.
Couldn't do it. That was immediately after all this. It was a period when he was muddling around and not knowing quite what to do.
Yeah.
And I think Russell was important because, it was when he was young, it was even suggested he should stand for Parliament, but he didn't want to, I think rightly.
Yes. I mean, one thing that comes out in the book, and something I've noticed actually going around the Dickens Museum, which incidentally is such a marvellous place. I know Cindy, the director, is in the audience, but I'm not just saying it for that reason. But one is reminded there just how many friends he had, how much of an entertainer he was, how many people sort of were in the geography of his life.
Yes, and particularly younger men who revered him and gathered around him, and of course running his magazine. Not only was he writing novels, He was running a magazine, which would be editing a magazine, which was a huge job for year after year after year after year. And at the end of his life, he had 3 careers. He was writing his novels, he was editing the magazine, and he was going around giving readings. I mean, no normal human being could have done that. It killed him, of course.
Yes, he died of exhaustion.
Well, I think partly, yes.
Claire, I mean, like you, I've read and reread his novels many times, absolutely adore them, get transfixed by the prose. But there are times when he sort of dips into almost ridiculous sentimentality. I mean, particularly talking about female characters, sort of Dora Spenlow, Amy Dorrit.
It's quite funny about Dora.
Yeah.
Remember her trying to make dinner and not...
I've never seen anything in his early life that sort of tells me why would he talk in that sort of gushing, over-the-top, cloying way almost about female characters.
Well, he was terribly in love as a young man and used to go and stand beneath the window in the city of... gosh, what was her name? Yes, thank you. I think he did. I mean, I think there is this curious thing that he had a sort of deeply sentimental attitude in theory to women, while in fact being rather brutal to them, certainly in the case of his wife.
And if you look at contemporaneous painting, genre painting of women at home, you know, they are very often rather like that, overly saccharine with their hands on their breasts, and there isn't really. They lack the sort of fibre that one might expect or want in a character.
But he's also, I don't know, you didn't say this, but he's been accused of being sentimental about children and about the deaths of children. And there I think one can defend him, because he said, rightly, that children died, many children died, and that readers were comforted. He knows that. They were comforted by reading.
Yeah, I can't read The Death of Little Joe without crying. I mean, every time I read it, it just kills me. Yeah, and I don't get that same feeling. I mean, some of the passages I'm talking about, I read it, I think they're just not very good. If you read those alone, of course, in the whole context, I mean, the guy's amazing. But yeah, I just wondered sort of why he seemed to dip into that, but maybe it's the times.
But with Dora, do you think he's too sentimental about her?
I think so. Yeah.
About Betsy Trotwood, I remember that was the figure at A-level. Gosh, I loved her.
Exactly. She was a great supporter of
Fantastic. Chasing the donkeys away. You're right, it's the characters, isn't it? It's the characters.
Yeah.
And the story.
No, she is.
And hyperbole as well, isn't it? Laying line upon line and getting away with it. A sort of an acrobat with words. That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yes. Betsy Trotwood, in fact, is a very, very good, strong woman. Who could absolutely hold her own in the world and
yes.
do whatever she wanted to do.
Yes. Anyone else would like? Yes, you.
Did Dickens have terrible handwriting?
No, Dickens' handwriting is rather good.
Oh, really?
Yes. You can go and look at his manuscripts and V&A.
And wouldn't you say you get a feeling of the momentum of his mind by looking at the page?
I think it's thrilling. It's thrilling, and there's one in East Anglia too. It's Great Expectations. Is in name of the town. Wisbech. Thank you. Yes, my brain is collapsing. Yes, Wisbech. They've got the manuscript, and it's absolutely. They try to fob you off with showing you a photocopy of it, but persist. The original. And it's wonderful to see. He doesn't do very much crossing out, but he does crossing out, and then something is abandoned and changed.
And back to those characters that you've identified as the key to his success. How did he create them? I mean, there are anecdotes, but I want to hear it from you, really. I mean, first the names.
I think he made lists of names, didn't he? Mrs. Gamp was based on a nurse, I think, who looked after Miss Coutts's companion.
Yes.
I mean, he got stories about people. Mr. Micawber is very clearly his father, based on his father.
But the actual sound of the name, Copperfield, they're not directly related to the character, but they just beautifully, at arm's length, evoke the character, don't they?
Yes. In the night, I was trying to remember. And I'd sometimes, if I can't sleep at night, I try and remember all the names and characters in the book. And I was thinking about Great Expectations. And I thought, who's the lawyer? And the name Jagger came into my mind. And I thought, this is nonsense. Mick Jagger, you know. No. When I got up in the morning, I rushed down to the library and it is Jaggers.
Jaggers, is it?
And I felt so pleased with it.
Yeah. But Scrooge, what a brilliantly onomatopoeic word for impossible meanness.
I mean, Henry James used to use deliberately ugly names because he thought it was a bit sort of silly to try and put pretty names to your character.
Yeah.
But Dickens just hit it. There are lists. I mean, there are lists of names.
Yes. And then wouldn't he look in the mirror and sort of contort his face into the characters that he wanted?
Well, I think, yes, one of his, Mary described going and seeing him doing that, yes.
Yeah.
And of course, those great walks he took, he had to walk 12, 15, 20 miles a day. We're not talking about him walking at night in London, we're talking about him actually going for walks. And I think what he was doing in those walks, that's when he was working, that's when he was creating his characters, that's when he was really getting it all together. And then he would get up early the next morning. And his working hours were usually starting early, working till lunchtime. But of course, when he was under pressure writing, so he would be working all the time.
Yeah.
He was well capable of working hours and hours and hours when he was finishing something, but then he would take long holidays and breaks.
Yes. And he was interested in the mystical as well, wasn't he?
I think he was a bit cautious about things like
Well,
that.
I mean, his time out in Switzerland, was it Switzerland where with the hypnosis and what have you? Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, in Italy, no.
In Italy,
Yes,
yeah.
when he would. Yes, I don't think that was mystical. I mean, mesmerise. He thought it was a medical thing. He thought he could mesmerise
Right,
people, and he
okay.
could. And the famous time when he was trying to mesmerise at a distance his woman patient in Genoa, but they were travelling through Italy with his wife on the coach next to him, and suddenly his wife fell into a trance. And his mesmeric message, which was meant to go to his other patient, hit his wife. I asked Jonathan Miller a lot about mesmerism, and he said that there is no real explanation for mesmerism. It is not scientifically explicable. But the fact is, people can do it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting, you know, and it seems to bear out what we all know, that some people can just do it, and some people will respond to it, without there being any known experience. I don't think Dickens was mystical. I think he was very, very down to earth, and a religion. You know, he wasn't really religious. He wrote the life of Christ for his children. He had a sort of idea that, you know, Christ was a good thing and that heaven was a good thing, but he wasn't. He hated bishops, of course, and didn't like the organised church. Although he did in the late book put in a good East End clergyman, which was the right thing to do, because they certainly existed. But I don't think he thought much about mystical
Fate,
things.
synchronicity, that sort of coincident, extraordinary. I seem to remember this from the books that I read at school. There was a way of keeping these great unfurling narratives going, wasn't it?
Yes, yes.
They join up inexplicably, and perhaps that's just writing, is it?
Well, it's true. When he was at Niagara, he did say he thought about his dead sister-in-law, her spirit flying over and seeing Niagara. I got into trouble for making a mocking remark about that in a book, and a Dickens lover at an event like this reproached me bitterly for being so unfeeling, probably rightly.